I moved into the apartment on a cold December afternoon. The sky was pale gray, the kind of colorless winter day where the air feels heavy and every sound is muffled. I carried the last box up the narrow stairs, fumbling with the keys the landlord had given me. The building wasn't impressive in aging. Two-story structure tucked into the edge of town, with paint peeling from the walls and a smell of old carpet in the hallways. Still, it was cheap, and after months of searching for something I could actually afford, it felt like a victory. My unit was on the second floor, right in the corner. When I first stepped inside, I remember the silence. It was the kind of silence that presses on your ears, so complete that it feels unnatural. I set the box down in the living room and waited, expecting to hear the distant muffled sounds of neighbors' TVs, children, maybe a dog barking, but there was nothing, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling. I convinced myself that was a good thing. Peace and quiet. I unpacked slowly, made myself a quick dinner, and ended up falling asleep on the couch with the television buzzing in the background. Sometime after midnight, I woke with a start. The room was dark except for the glow of the TV screen. For a moment I couldn't tell what had woken me. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, but unmistakable, soft, deliberate steps moving directly above me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Of course, there would be people above me. It was an apartment complex. But as I listened closer, something didn't feel right. The steps weren't random, like someone walking from room to room. They followed a pattern. A slow, steady pace from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopping, then turning back, over and over in a rhythm too controlled to be casual. I muted the TV. The sound became clearer in the silence, echoing faintly through the ceiling. I lay there staring upward, waiting for it to stop. But it didn't. In fact, the footsteps seemed to pause right above me over the exact spot where I lay on the couch. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I ran into the landlord outside while he was clearing snow from the walkway. Trying to sound casual, I asked, "Who lives above me?" "They were up pretty late last night." He stopped and frowned, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Above you?" "Nobody. That apartment's been empty for years. Needs renovation, pipes are bad, wiring's outdated. Nobody's lived there since 2012. I laughed nervously and brushed it off, but the words stuck with me all day. That night, I went to bed earlier, telling myself I must have imagined it. Yet as the clock struck midnight, I lay awake in the dark, listening. And right on cue, the footsteps began again. By the third night, the footsteps had become a routine. They always began a little after midnight, as if whoever or whatever was above me kept to a schedule. At first, I thought I could drown them out. I put in earbuds, played music, even turned the TV on at full volume. But no matter what I did, the sound cut through. The ceiling seemed to carry every vibration straight into my bones. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. There were pauses, long silences followed by sudden bursts of movement, like someone sprinting from one side of the apartment to the other. Sometimes it sounded like furniture being dragged, the slow scraping across old wooden floors. Other times, sharp thuds echoed down, heavy enough that I could feel them in the walls. Sleep became impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next sound. Every creak, every shift in the air made my heart race. During the day, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Old buildings make noise, right? Pipes expand, wood settles. But deep down, I knew these sounds were too precise, too intentional. One night, I finally worked up the courage to confront it. Around 2 a.m., when the dragging started again, I crept into the hallway and climbed the stairs to the empty unit above me. My legs trembled the entire way, but I told myself I just needed proof, some explanation, to put my mind at ease. The hallway was dim, only one flickering light bulb casting shadows across the stained carpet. When I reached the door to the apartment, my stomach dropped. Dust coated the knob. A cobweb stretched from the frame to the door itself, untouched. Nobody had been inside for a long, long time. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the wood. At first, silence, then breathing. Slow, deliberate, deep breaths, as if someone stood just on the other side, waiting. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself, and rushed back down to my apartment. I slammed my door shut and locked it, even though that wouldn't have mattered. Whatever was up there clearly wasn't confined by locks. The next morning, I confronted the landlord again. My voice shook as I told him about the noises, the dragging, the breathing. He just gave me a tired look. Empty units make sounds. The wood shifts, pipes groan. You're stressed, that's all. Try to relax. I wanted to believe him, but that night, when the sounds returned, something changed. The footsteps didn't just pace anymore. They stopped directly above my bedroom. And then, in the suffocating silence, I heard it my name. Daniel. It was faint, muffled, but there was no mistaking it. Someone or something knew I was listening. By the end of the first week, I was unraveling. My body ached from exhaustion. My eyes were bloodshot, and every small sound in the building made me flinch. Friends at work noticed my shaking hands, the way I drifted off mid-conversation. They told me I needed rest, maybe even to see a doctor. But how could I explain that it wasn't my mind keeping me awake, it was what lived above me? That Friday night, I tried something new. I left my phone recording on my nightstand, determined to capture proof. The footsteps started just after midnight, as usual. Slow, steady, pacing across the ceiling. Then came the dragging, louder this time, like something heavy being pulled right across my floorboards. My body froze under the covers, my breath shallow, heart pounding. The steps stopped directly above my bed. For a long moment, there was nothing, just silence, and then 3 knocks. Sharp, deliberate knocks against the ceiling. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of bed, slamming on the lights. The apartment was empty, of course, but when I checked the recording the next morning, my stomach turned. The audio captured everything, the footsteps, the dragging, but also something else. Between the knocks, there was a whisper, my name, drawn out, distorted, like air being forced through broken lungs. Daniel. I didn't sleep the following night. Instead, I sat in the living room, lights on, eyes glued to the ceiling. Around 1 a.m., the sounds started again. But this time, they weren't above me. They were inside my apartment. The floor creaked from the corner of the room, slow, careful steps creeping closer. I stared into the shadows, every muscle locked in terror. The air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me. And then from the darkness by the hallway I saw it. A figure, barely visible, but real. Its outline was wrong too tall, limbs crooked as if they had been broken and set back in the wrong places. Its head tilted unnaturally to the side. I couldn't make out a face, but I felt its gaze. It lingered there for what felt like hours, swaying side to side, before fading back into the dark. When the sun finally rose, I packed what little I had and left. I didn't tell the landlord. I didn't even bother to collect my security deposit. I just drove until the building disappeared in the distance. It's been months since then. I live in another city now, in a newer apartment, surrounded by neighbors I can actually hear during the day. Yet every night, when the clock creeps past midnight, I find myself holding my breath, waiting, because sometimes even here, I swear I can hear the slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing, stopping, listening, and always directly above me. I used to rent a small ground-floor apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The rent was low, the street was calm, and for the first few months, I thought I had gotten lucky. The only thing I disliked about the place was the bedroom window. It faced directly onto the street, just a few feet away from the sidewalk. The blinds never closed all the way, and at night, when cars passed, their headlights cut straight through the gaps. I told myself it was no big deal. I wasn't the paranoid type. I grew up in the city. I knew what it was like to live around strangers. You just minded your own business, and they minded theirs. That's what I thought until the first night I heard the tapping. It was around 2 in the morning. I had been asleep for hours when a faint, rhythmic sound pulled me out of a dream. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes opened to the pale glow of moonlight slipping between the blinds. For a moment I stayed still, listening. The tapping came again, clearer this time. My first thought was that it must have been tree branches, though I couldn't recall any close enough to reach the window. Slowly I turned my head. That's when I saw it. A face, pressed right against the glass, so close the breath fogged a small circle on the window. Pale skin, hollow eyes, lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a frown. Just watching. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. My brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe I was still dreaming. Maybe it was some drunk who had wandered off the street. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became that it was real. His head tilted slightly, as if curious, and his hand rose slowly, tapping the glass again. I bolted upright, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. By the time I glanced back, the face was gone. I ripped open the blinds, expecting to see someone running down the street. But the sidewalk was empty. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the block, checked the bushes, asked me questions I could barely answer. Their conclusion was that it had been a trespasser, maybe drunk, maybe high, who had moved on. I nodded, pretended to believe them, but when they left, I couldn't shake the image burned into my mind, the pale skin, the hollow eyes, the way he just stood there, watching me sleep. That was only the first night. For a few days after the police came, things went back to normal, or at least I convinced myself they had. I left the blinds shut tight, shoved a chair against the window, and tried not to think about the pale face pressed against the glass. It was easier in the daylight. People walked their dogs outside, kids rode their bikes, and the neighborhood looked harmless. But when night came, every creak of the building made me tense. I slept with the light on. It was a week later when the tapping returned. This time it was louder, sharper. I woke instantly, heart already pounding before my eyes opened. I lay frozen in bed, the same sound filling the room. Tap, tap, tap. But something was different. The blinds weren't just cracked open like usual. They had been pulled all the way up. Cold air rushed over me as I realized someone had lifted them while I slept. I forced myself to look, every nerve in my body screaming not to. At first I saw nothing but the dark street outside, lit faintly by the orange glow of a distant street lamp. The sidewalk was empty. The houses across the road were dark, and then I noticed the reflection. In the glass behind me there was movement. A shape, tall, human, standing in the corner of my bedroom. I spun around so fast I nearly fell out of bed, but the room was empty. Nothing in the corner but shadows. My chest heaved, my skin damp with sweat. I tore through the apartment with a kitchen knife in my hand, checking every closet, every doorway, under the bed. There was nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, I was shaking with exhaustion. I called my landlord, begged him to replace the locks, to install security bars on the window. He sighed and told me the neighborhood was safe, that I was overreacting. No one's going to climb into your bedroom window, he said. But he didn't see what I saw. He didn't feel the way the air shifted in that moment. How it felt like someone was still in the room with me, even after I turned around. Over the next week, I tried everything: duct tape across the blinds, stacking furniture against the window, even moving my bed into the living room. But the tapping always found me. Sometimes faint, sometimes harsh, always in the middle of the night, always pulling me awake from the edge of sleep. And sometimes I swore I could hear breathing, not from outside, but from inside the room. By the third week, I was barely functioning. I dragged myself through work half asleep, jumped at every sound, and avoided going home until it was too late to stay anywhere else. My friends thought I was paranoid. One of them even offered to crash at my place just to prove nothing was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to let anyone stay the night. It felt dangerous, like inviting them into something I couldn't control. That Friday, I forced myself to go to bed early. I pushed the dresser in front of the window, taped the blinds shut, and double-checked the locks on every door. For once, I thought maybe I'd finally get some sleep. But around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to silence. And somehow, that was worse. The usual background hum, the refrigerator, the pipes, the distant sound of cars was gone. The apartment felt sealed, like I was trapped inside a vacuum. Then I heard it. Not tapping, not outside, but from inside the bedroom. It was the sound of nails dragging slowly across the wall, just inches above my headboard. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to move, didn't want to look, but the sound continued, scraping down toward the floor, across the wall, closer to the closet. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. The screen lit up, reflecting a figure that shouldn't have been there. In the glow, I saw him. The same pale face, hollow eyes. Standing by the closet door, head tilted, lips stretched into something that looked like a smile. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He raised a finger to his lips, like he wanted me silent. Then, in the weakest, most broken whisper, he said one word, "She." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The sound snapped me out of the trance, and I lunged for the light switch. The bulb flickered on, blinding me for a second. When my eyes adjusted, the corner was empty. The room was silent again. I left that night with nothing but my wallet and keys. I didn't bother to pack, didn't bother to lock the door. I just drove until the sun came up. The landlord called me days later, furious that I'd abandoned the lease. He threatened legal action, demanded an explanation. I never gave him one. How could I? Even now, in a new city, in a new apartment, I sleep with the lights on. I check the windows twice before bed. But sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, I wake up with the same sensation, the feeling that someone is standing just behind me, waiting for me to turn my head. And every once in a while, I swear I can hear that same voice. She. I've had sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember. Most people don't experience it more than once or twice in their lives, but for me, it became almost routine. A couple of times each month, I'd wake up in the middle of the night unable to move, my chest pinned as if an invisible weight was pressing down on me. Doctors told me it was stress, exhaustion, a trick of the brain, and maybe it was. But knowing that didn't make it any less terrifying. The worst part wasn't the paralysis itself. It was what I saw when it happened. The first time I was 17, I woke up to find myself staring at the ceiling, unable to lift a finger. My room looked the same as always, the posters on the walls, the glow from the alarm clock, but everything felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. A tall, thin shape lingering in the doorway. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. The figure just stood there, swaying gently from side to side, until the paralysis broke and I sat up gasping. The doorway was empty. Over the years, it kept happening. Sometimes the shadow stood by the window. Sometimes it sat in the chair across the room, always silent, always waiting. I told myself it was a hallucination, my mind trapped between sleep and wakefulness. But deep down, I felt there was more to it. Something too deliberate in the way it moved, in the way it seemed to notice me noticing it. For years, I kept it to myself. Friends would laugh, call it the sleep demon, a common joke for people who'd never felt it. I learned to live with it. I even started to expect it, like an unwanted guest that would eventually leave. But one night last winter, something changed. I woke up around 3 a.m., frozen as usual, my eyes darting around the room. This time, the figure wasn't by the door or the window. It was closer, much closer, standing at the foot of my bed. The details were clearer than ever before. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over bones that jutted unnaturally. Its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn, like its neck had been broken and reset wrong. But the worst part was the face. For the first time, it had one. The face didn't make sense. At first, it looked blank, as though someone had stretched pale, waxy skin over a skull and forgotten to add features. But slowly, far too slowly, it changed. A line appeared where its mouth should have been, splitting open like a tear in paper. The skin stretched wider and wider, curling upward into a grin that was too large, too jagged, to belong to anything human. Black gums, broken teeth, and lips pulled so tight the corners nearly reached its ears. I wanted to scream, to shut my eyes, to do anything to escape that hideous expression, but the paralysis held me in place. My body refused to move, my throat refused to work. All I could do was stare as the grin twitched, like it was forcing itself wider just to show me every rotten tooth. The figure swayed at the foot of my bed, head tilted, smile trembling as if it was trying not to laugh. I felt the weight on my chest grow heavier, pressing the air from my lungs. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. Then it leaned forward. I could hear it now breathing, slow, rattling breaths that scraped like sandpaper. The air grew colder, the room filling with the stench of damp earth and rot. Its grin widened again, impossibly, and I realized it wasn't just showing me its teeth. It was showing me delight. It was enjoying this. The sound that followed was worse than the smile. A whisper, soft but cutting, as though it was being spoken directly into my ear despite the distance. Still awake? The words slid down my spine like ice water. Every instinct in my body screamed that this was no hallucination. This wasn't some leftover dream or trick of the brain. Something was here, something aware of me, something that wanted me to know it was real. I tried to fight it, to jerk even a single muscle, but my body stayed locked in place. My vision blurred from the strain, tears welling in my eyes as I begged silently for the paralysis to end. Seconds stretched into eternity. Finally, with a violent jolt, my body obeyed. I shot upright, drenched in sweat, gasping like I had surfaced from drowning. The room was empty. The air was still. But the memory of that smile was carved into my mind, sharper than any nightmare. That night marked a turning point, because after that, the paralysis didn't just happen occasionally. It started happening every night, and every night the smile came back. I thought I could adapt. I told myself if I treated it like every other episode of sleep paralysis, it would eventually fade. That maybe my brain was replaying the same hallucination. But I was wrong. Each night, the figure returned, and each time, it came closer. At first, it stayed at the foot of the bed. Then, one night, it was beside me, leaning down until the smell of rot filled my nostrils, and its grin hovered just inches from my face. Another night, it crouched by my chest, its long fingers twitching, as though it wanted to touch me, but was holding back, savoring the moment. I stopped sleeping. I stayed up until dawn, hoping exhaustion would keep it away. But the less I slept, the worse the episodes became. My body would shut down without warning, and I'd wake up trapped, staring into that grotesque smile. Then came the last time. I had moved my bed against the wall, leaving no space for it to stand at the sides. I thought maybe that would help. That night I fell asleep just before midnight. I woke, paralyzed as always, but the figure wasn't at the foot of the bed. It wasn't by the window, or the chair, or the doorway. For a few seconds I thought maybe I had escaped. My relief was short-lived, because when my eyes shifted upward, I saw it. It was on the ceiling. Pinned there like an insect, its head twisted completely upside down. That impossible grin stretched across its face. Its greasy hair dangled toward me as it crawled slowly forward, its body bending in ways no body should bend. The mouth opened wider and wider still, until I thought the skin would split apart. "Daniel," it whispered in that same broken rasp. It dropped. I woke screaming, able to move again, thrashing beneath the covers. The room was empty, the ceiling bare, but the image of it falling toward me has never left. Since that night, I haven't had another episode of sleep paralysis. Not one. Friends tell me I should be grateful. Doctors call it a relief. But to me, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a promise. Because the last time I saw that smile, it wasn't fading away. It wasn't disappearing with the dream. It was coming closer. And I know, one night soon it won't stop.